Hi guys, it's Jeff here, and I'm joined again by Keltie Maguire for the third in our webinar series. And this one is about making better decisions in your photography business. So maybe you're like me, and like a lot of us who sometimes do struggle a little bit with decision making. And I think obviously the more important the decision, the bigger decision usually the case is, that the harder that decision is to make. Unlike like smaller general day-to-day decisions, you might be able to make them in a fraction of a second. But it's all about making the right decisions, because obviously if you make the correct decisions, those are the decisions that are going to take your business forward and help your business grow. So Keltie again has put together a fantastic presentation, and we'll take questions as we go along. And if you have any questions as we're running through, just pop them in the comments. I can keep an eye on the comments and interrupt during the presentation and pass those questions on to Keltie. So if you just want to pop in the comment section where you're watching from today, and are you a good decision maker? Do you make decisions easily? Do you struggle with making decisions? One of my biggest decision problems I have, especially when I go out for a meal, is what to choose on the dessert menu. So I can have a real big decision, important decision for my business, and I might be able to make that quite easily. But when I go out for a meal and I've got to pick a dessert, I really do struggle. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to bring you over to Keltie's display here, and we're just going to come out there. So Keltie, if you just want to take it away and start with your display.
Will do. Well, Jeff, based on a few comments you've made over these last few weeks, I'm starting to get the idea you might have a sweet tooth, because you've mentioned cake and desserts a few times now.
I certainly have, yeah.
Yeah, choosing what to eat can be difficult. I struggle with that too. I'm a big foodie, and especially going to a great restaurant or whatever, it can be really, really tough to decide. So I was telling Jeff, this is one of my favorite topics for a few different reasons, which I'll share with you today. But I mean, one personal reason is just the fact that historically I found decisions really challenging to make. And it wasn't so much that I was unhappy with the outcomes of my decisions. I spent a lot of time, gathering information, thinking about various decisions I've made in my life, and most have worked out quite favorably. But I think feeling like it was always so difficult to make those decisions, that there was no real ease in doing that. And I think fulfillment's the other piece of making decisions. It's not just about having decision making easier, but it's actually feeling good about those outcomes as well. So it's a topic that's near and dear to my heart personally, and it's something that I help my clients with. Virtually all of the clients I work with, are looking to make a choice, a decision. They're trying to navigate opportunities. So I can't wait to get into all of this with you today. So just briefly, what we're going to talk about, first of all, why we struggle with decisions. And as Jeff mentioned, maybe let us know, do you struggle with decisions? And if so, what about decision making is so hard for you? We're going to talk about your decision-making mindset and what I mean by that and why this is so important. And lastly, I'm going to share some of my top tools and tips for decision-making. So I love this quote by, I think, please correct me if my French is terrible, Albert Camus. I know he was French. I think he was French. Did I get it right? It's not Camus. Life is the sum of all your choices. And really, when you think about it, the life that we are living today, I mean, of course, we've got certain things outside of our control, but really the way we decide to live, who we decide to marry, what kind of career do we decide to have, the food we decide to put in our body, where we decide to live, this is what creates our life. So it's no wonder that many of us feel very pressured and nervous around making decisions. So I mentioned this topic's kind of near and dear to my heart, and it became especially relevant going back about 3 years when, in the course of a couple years' time, I made the decision to move from Canada to Munich, Germany. I made the very difficult decision to close my business, which if you've ever closed a business or even maybe quit a job to go full-time with your photography, you know how sort of angst-provoking that can be. I started my coaching business, so I had to decide, what do I do next? What kind of a business am I going to have? I made the decision to get married. My partner and I, after 10 years, decided, you know what, life's just going to be easier for us if we decide to marry. And yet, making all these decisions, I felt so angsty. I felt like decision-making was consuming sort of a disproportionate amount of energy. Jeff mentioned at the beginning, like maybe little decisions are easy for you, but I actually felt like little decisions in some ways were even harder for me. It's like, do I go for a jog, or do I decide to, I don't know, do Pilates? Like silly kind of decision to have to make. But these kinds of things were just taking so much time and energy, I found. Decision making seems super complicated. It's like, how do I know which path to choose? And then once I've chosen it, how do I know what the other option would be? And how do I weigh things out? And do I make lists? And this whole topic really felt shrouded in mystery. So maybe, again, let us know, do you relate to any of this? Do you have the same sort of experience making decisions? So that kind of all led me to this question, like, why is decision making so hard? And why is it that we struggle with decisions? What is it about them that is so difficult for us? What I came to find, both through my personal experiences, as well as now having coached hundreds of different people on various types of decisions, is that the way we regard our decisions and the decision-making process, and of course the outcomes of these decisions, is actually often as important as what we decide. And I know that might be a little bit contradictory. So we tend to put a lot of focus on, okay, the important thing with decision-making is what that decision is. Do I choose to eat chocolate cake, or do I go for the creme brulee in Jeff's case, okay? Well, what I came to find is actually the way we see that decision, how we feel about having made the decision we make, etc. Those things are just as important. And I'll tell you a bit more about what I mean by that and why I talk about this decision-making mindset. So what I found is that the way we regard our decisions and certain shifts in our mindset around decision-making can in itself lead to more fulfilling decision-making. So again, it's not so much about what we choose, but it's more how we choose to regard those decisions. So the first mindset I see so many people have is this idea of, I have to choose the right path. And you can just, if you want, put a 1 in the comments if you've ever felt this way. I have to choose the right path. That's heavy, right? I have to. Okay, got to choose it. It needs to be the right path. Well, what's the right path? So a shift for you in making decisions, if you're feeling that way, is to recognize that different choices are just that. Really, it's not necessarily about good versus bad choices. It's more about having different experiences. So for example, if you decide, should we have a staycation? I know we've got a lot of people in the UK. So do we have a staycation in Wales this year for summer, or do we go to Italy? Rather than thinking like, I need to make the right choice, why not just say, well, those are different kinds of experiences. And of course, they're going to come with, different consequences and pros and cons, but it's not about, staying at home being the good choice or going to Italy being the good choice and the other being bad. It's really just about having different kinds of experiences.
I suppose as well, it's quite hard to differentiate whether one is a good choice or a bad choice until afterwards. And then you don't really know if it was a bad choice in comparison to the previous one if you didn't take the other one, So I think a lot of it might be just in your head, you're putting this good versus bad.
Totally. And there's something I read, I'm not sure if it was an original quote, but a gentleman whose blog I found called Darius Foru, I believe is his name. He talks about the fact that good choices, making the good best choice, can lead to bad outcomes, and bad choices can lead to good outcomes. Perhaps you've made a bad choice. Let's say, I don't know, you had a few too many drinks and you made a phone call maybe you shouldn't have made. That might lead to a good choice, right? Maybe you have a hard conversation. Maybe you meet the man or woman of your dreams at the bar, whatever. That might be a bad choice, but it leads to a good outcome. And likewise, making a good choice, let's say deciding to wear a helmet on your bike and making sure you look both ways when you cross the street, like that can still lead to getting hit by a car. So in a way, and maybe it's not consolation, but sometimes this is all just a bit of a crapshoot, right? And we need to recognize that we can do our very damnedest to make the best good choice, but sometimes it's still going to lead to experiences, that will be what they are. So one question we can ask ourselves when we're faced with a difficult choice is, what kind of experiences do I want? So for example, let's say you're trying to decide where you want to go on holidays. You might say, okay, the kind of experiences I want to be relaxed. I want to be with my family. I want to be on the seaside. I don't want to spend too much money, all these things. And you might recognize, like, actually for us going to Italy this summer, that's not going to be very relaxing. We're going to have to worry about, protocols and quarantining, and we probably wouldn't go to the sea because it's too far to get there, whatever. So by focusing on experiences that you want as outcomes, that can kind of help you align your choices. All right. Another question that I like to pose for myself is this one, which is, what if either choice can lead to my desired outcome? So I see, for a lot of people, it's like, okay, let's say, do I stay in a traditional 9-to-5, or do I go off and have my own business full time? And if you think about the desired outcomes you have for your life, let's say to make a great income, to have freedom, to have a great team, and you sort of, I guess, open your mind to the possibility that either or any of the choices you're considering can lead to your desired outcome, that can be really freeing. So in this case, you might say, actually, both choices could lead to having great income. Both choices could lead to a certain amount of freedom. Both choices could mean I'm surrounded by a team. And conversely, you might also recognize, like, actually, one of these choices won't lead to my desired outcome. But I know for me, it's been really freeing, and thinking about the kind of life I want to have, let's say, freedom, to have connection with people, to have growth opportunities. I actually think that my life could probably look a whole multitude of different ways, and yet I would still ultimately have this desired outcome. So it takes some of that pressure off getting it just right.
Like, for example, a photographer thinking about opening up a studio. So the idea of a studio, you could have, yes, there's going to be a lot more people passing by the studio. You're going to have your presence on the high street, but the downside of things is that will take away some of your freedom because you're going to be in there 9-to-5. The studio's got to be manned. There's the extra cost. So I think it's, as you say, it's working up the pros and cons. And if you're trying to build more of a lifestyle business, then maybe a high street studio isn't going to fit in with your ultimate goal of having a lifestyle business. So on that aspect alone, it might be quite easy to discount something which is really quite a big decision.
Totally, yeah. And so in that case, it's like, okay, the experiences I want are to have that flexibility, to not necessarily be tied to a physical space, et cetera. And again, it's not that having a brick and mortar studio is a bad thing. It's the right choice for a lot of people. But for you, based on the kind of outcome you want, based on the kind of experiences you want to have, it's not going to be the best choice for you.
Yeah.
Good example. Thank you. Okay, next sort of mindset. Again, let us know in the comments. Just write number 2 if you can relate to this. If I screw this up, there is no turning back. It's sort of like we are having to blindly choose which door to walk through, 1, 2, or 3. And the idea is if we go through door number 2, like that's it, doors closed behind us, and we have to live with the consequences of that choice. I would argue that very few choices are truly irreparable, or maybe a better word than irreparable is recoverable from, if recoverable is a word. I'm going to say that, first of all, we need to ask ourselves, is my choice actually that significant? So as much as Jeff loves dessert, it's like if he chooses creme brulee and he tastes his friend's chocolate cake and he realizes, oh, the chocolate cake's better, like, is it really the end of the world? Does it really matter that much, if I go for a run or if I do Pilates? I think a lot of times we get kind of obsessive about, like, we'll call them leisure time problems. My husband and I call them. It's like, is this a leisure time problem? Are we really like worrying on a high level? So the first thing is asking ourselves, is this actually that significant? Deciding whether or not to open a physical studio is probably a pretty significant decision. Deciding whether you take on one client that you're not 100% sure about. Yeah, of course, outcomes may not always be favorable, but it's probably going to be less significant. Okay, so just want to remind you of your own sort of recoverability or ability to recover, as well as your resilience. Even if you make a choice that ends up not being the best choice for you, and we've all made them before, I would encourage you to look at past choices you've made that maybe haven't been the best for you. We have an ability to move on from that, pardon me. And furthermore, there's growth opportunities in those things. So as much as we hate to think about making poor choices, oftentimes that's really a kind of a transformative moment for us to be able to learn a lot and to be able to take things in a new direction. I also want to remind you that you can, I'm going to say, almost always choose again. Again, I realize there's certain choices in life. I always say death and children. Those are choices you make that are very final, should you choose those things. Most people, they tell themselves, and they're in this trap, like, I can't choose again. If I did this with my jewelry business, like, I told myself I had created this business. I had run it for a number of years. I couldn't choose to close it. I couldn't choose a new career. Well, that's a load of, you know what? Of course I could choose. So reminding yourself, you do have a choice. It's not to say that it's going to be easy, but you do have a choice, and you can always, almost always, choose again. Okay, next. I am so afraid to get it wrong, I won't decide. Again, this is sort of this notion that there's one right or wrong choice. You become paralyzed and you don't make decisions at all. I think there was somebody, if I'm not mistaken, who might have commented on the post about this event who said, oh, actually, I think it was in the Facebook group. Remind me, the gentleman who does the rugby photos, I think it might have been.
Pete.
Yes, thank you. I think he had commented, you know, he knows some people, for example, that they just refuse to choose. They're like, I'm just going to wait until the last possible minute because I can't make a decision, and therefore someone else will decide for me. And he sort of said, I think it was Pete, forgive me if I'm wrong, Pete, but he sort of said, like, what a way to live. But I think a lot of us do this, right? It's like, we just kind of wait, and then, hey, guess what? Like, the decision has been made. There are no other options. So we have to ask ourselves, first of all, what's the cost of our indecision? And remember, if you're deciding not to choose, you are making a decision, right? That's still a decision.
Yeah, very true, very true.
I like this quote by Jim Rohn. Doesn't matter which side of the fence you get off on sometimes. What matters most is getting off. You cannot make progress without making decisions. And this is so true. You know, if you right now in your business are refusing to make decisions about anything, you know, what kind of, you know, simple things. I remember when I moved from my jewelry business to this coaching business, I decided I wouldn't use MailChimp anymore for my business for sending out emails. And I gave myself about 20 minutes to say, okay, I'm going to choose between ConvertKit, ActiveCampaign, and whatever else for emails. Because the fact is, if I would have taken the next, you know, days, weeks, months to figure out what email tool I would use, I'm not going to be sending any emails. I'm not going to be communicating with customers. I'm not going to get my message off there. So our indecision, there is a very real cost that comes with that. Imperfect action is better than inaction. I think you've probably heard me say this here before in the last few weeks. And the other thing is, if you don't choose, others will choose for you. And perhaps you're okay with that, but I'm not. I want to be sort of the creator of my own destiny as best as I can. So just, you know, remain in the driver's seat if that's what you want to be doing.
And I think, you know, going back to that last point, that can sometimes be the case with, you know, somebody thinking about doing something. I'm thinking about launching this business, or I've got this idea for something, nobody else is doing it, and you put it off, you don't do it, and then all of a sudden somebody else launches a similar idea or creates a similar business in your area, and they beat you to it. It's your inaction or you're putting off the decision has stopped you doing something, and you're being beaten to it by somebody else.
Yeah, no, really good example. Yeah. I had that happen at one point. It was years and years ago, but I had an idea for some sort of product-based business, and lo and behold, you know, someone else starting it. All right. There are too many options to choose from. How many people get overwhelmed by the plentitude of choices? And there's a book I'll recommend at the end here. I've included the name on a slide, but it's called The Paradox of Choice by Barry Schwartz. And really, he argues that a lot of our dissatisfaction that we have, you know, those of us, you know, who are privileged enough to have this many choices, is the fact that we just have too many things to choose from. It's like from going to the grocery store and choosing a type of cereal to eat to looking at what kind of career path we can have. A lot of these things, you know, you think about even, you know, women, call it 50 years ago, it's like you're going to be a stay-at-home mom, or you're going to be a teacher, or you're going to be a, I don't know, whatever women were allowed to do, right? It's like now, oh my God, you can be a rocket scientist, or you could be a doctor, or you can be a photographer, or you can be a clarity coach. So this can be really paralyzing for people. First of all, you can't do it all. And it probably sounds a bit silly to state, but a lot of people really still actually have this belief or hope that they can do all the things. And as soon as you recognize that you're not going to be able to do and be all the things you want to be in this lifetime, the better you're just going to be able to make some choices about what is possible. So the fact is, there are 1,000,001 paths you can take. And if you're really right now waffling between 2 or 3 choices, know that there's actually probably 2 or 3 million choices. Not to make things more complicated for you, but the fact is there's an infinite number of options here. Love this quote. You can do anything, but you can't do everything. I like to remind myself of that when I have a lot of things on the go. It's like you're capable of a lot, but you cannot do a lot all at once. You just can't. And I also love this sort of philosophy from Dieter Rams, which is less but better. And this is really what I aim for in my business and my life, is to focus on less, but to do a better job of it and to enjoy those experiences more.
Funny enough, and this is something maybe photographers might be able to relate to, but when we had the boudoir studio doing the lingerie makeovers, initially when I first started, with the enthusiasm to really give a over deliver and over provide to the clients, would give them somewhere in the region of about 80 to 90 images to proof for their end final selection for their album. And what that did was that led to, actually, we didn't realize till later, was that confused them. You'd given them too many options. So what we, fast forward about 3 or 4 months down the line from that, we reduced the number of options down to about 30. Now, the album itself had 20 pages, so they were only selecting 20 out of the 30 to go into the album. Yeah. The decisions were made quicker, but the end result was a higher spend by the client, because we didn't, over confuse them with too many choices.
Yeah, really good point. And we hear so much about sort of diversifying our offers, and you maybe have 10 different packages clients can choose from. There was a famous study, which you may have heard of, involving jams. And what they did, they put a whole bunch of jams out at a grocery store. They had like 21 of them or something. And more people tried jams when there were a lot of jams. So let's say 100 people tried the jams, all these 21 jams. But when it came to buying, I think it was a number of about 7, which they say is sort of like a manageable number. They sold way more jam when people had less choices. This is one of the reasons it's good to have like maybe a low, mid, and higher price point, but you really don't generally want to have more choices than that, because as Jeff said, you're not gonna make as much money. You're just not.
Yeah. And I think when you look at some of the big, the big companies who sell online or who promote their products online, you go into websites, and quite often on websites you'll see 3 to 4 packages, maybe no more than 4 packages, and then either the second or the third package will be highlighted in their package chart, and it'll say most popular. So already they're sort of like directing you to potentially their most profitable, but they're not giving you 10 packages or a dozen packages. They're giving you, maybe 3 or 4. And you see this with all sorts, from BT Internet to Virgin to Sky TV, to even when you go to buy, cars. With cars you will have the S, the SE, and the HSE, or the 3 different classes, from the standard, the mid, and the top of the range. And then you can, once you've made that initial decision, that's that item. So then you can start adding bits on if you want.
Yeah, 100%. You'll make more money that way, and people also make decisions more quickly, which will again lead to more money. You're not going to be, like the boudoir client that had 90 photos. It probably took forever to get an answer from them, so you're dragging out projects. You're not able to move along with what you're doing. So, yeah, good examples. Okay, next sort of mindset shift. These are kind of hypotheticals, right? So a lot of times it's like, well, what if this happens? How should I handle this? Or how would I proceed if? So the thing to remember, if you're asking yourself this, and for example, let's say, it's not Sue, is it Anne? There's a woman in the group who's talking about, she kind of struggles with some Photoshop. I know she's mentioned she's had some requests for certain things. Yeah. She might be freaking out like, well, what if the client comes back and they're asking me to Photoshop their hair from blonde to brown? And okay, I would say in this case, first of all, like, it's good in a certain sense to anticipate what our clients might want. But first of all, nobody's asking you to make a decision, right? And like, check in with yourself. If you're thinking, well, what if the client comes back and they think that £2,000 is too much money to spend, and they're really, okay, hold on, this isn't happening yet. Let's just take a step back. So we have to remember, first of all, new information will be revealed over time. Classic case example, we think about people applying for a job. I've had friends, well, what if I apply for this job and I only get a couple weeks holiday and the pay is $10,000? Okay, hold on. You're going to find out way more about this job when and if they decide to interview you. You might never be asked to choose. So you might never have the opportunity to, it's like the client might decide not to hire you, or maybe they'll just come back and they'll say, yeah, this sounds great. So no use fretting or making decisions when you're not being asked to. And really, we need to save our energy in the interim, because I'm sure we've all made these sort of hypothetical decisions only to realize that we never actually have to cross that bridge. All right, so let's move along to some tools and tactics for decision making. And of course, as I mentioned, some of these mindset shifts in and of themselves can be really helpful for how we approach decisions. So my first tip is to know thyself. Self-knowledge is queen or king when it comes to decision making. Yeah. So I'm a big believer that the more we can get to know ourselves, our preferences, what's important to us, what our non-negotiables are, what our overall vision is, as we talked about in week 1, the easier it will become to make decisions. I really love, her name's Danielle Laporte, and she asks this question, which is really about how do I want to feel? Because she argues that most of the goals we're pursuing, most of the dreams that we have, most of the things that we want to achieve, it's actually about eliciting certain feelings for ourselves. A feeling of freedom, a feeling of power, a feeling of satisfaction. So by asking yourself, let's say in your business, you want to feel connected, you want to feel creative, and somebody comes to you with a shoot that you think, oh God, this is going to be like so boring, I could put a pen in my eye. Is that going to make you feel creative? Probably not. So that's going to make it easier for you to assess those situations. Knowing what you want is also a means of pre-deciding. It's like by the time somebody comes to me, with an opportunity, let's say to collaborate for something or, to ask me to be on their podcast, the clearer I am in terms of what I want my business to look like, who I want to be working with, all those things, the easier it's going to be for me to very simply say, no, thank you, or yes, that sounds awesome. Okay, so the more clarity we have in terms of what we want, the better we can orientate our choices to align with that. And we can simply ask ourselves when posed with an opportunity or a choice that we need to make, like, will this thing, this opportunity, this relationship, you name it, take me closer to what I want, or will it take me further away from it? All right, here's another tactic, 10-10-10. I stole this one. So this is by a woman by the name of I think it's Susie Welsh. I've written her name down in just a moment. And how it works is you want to envision the outcome for whatever different choices you're considering in 10 minutes, 10 months, and 10 years. And 10 minutes is, all these time frames, they're not entirely literal, but basically we want to think about what the outcome might be in 10 minutes, or pardon me, in the immediate future, in the short-term future, and in the long-term future.
Right.
And Susie Welch, she has a book. I can't personally recommend the book. I found it pretty repetitive, but there's a good article on Oprah.com that if you just search 10-10-10, that comes up, and she explains this philosophy pretty well. But really what this does is it helps provide perspective and reflection in your decision-making. So, for example, if you're trying to decide if you go to your daughter's baseball game versus assist with your friend's shoot this weekend at a wedding, you can ask yourself, in 10 minutes, my daughter may be upset. In 10 months, my daughter will have forgotten about it. Or conversely, in 10 months, we're gonna have a better bond because I was there for their sports game. And likewise, you would do the same thing, the 10-10-10, for if you were to assist your friend. Maybe you say in 10 months, I've actually got great opportunities to shoot my own wedding because I've got my own clients' weddings because I've had that experience. Okay, this helps us move beyond short-term emotion and really look at sort of that long-term thinking in terms of our choices.
And do you think the majority of people's decisions are initial holdback from decisions are short-term as opposed to long-term?
Yeah, I think it depends on the person, but I think it is easy often to get tied up in that short-term emotion, and it probably depends on the kind of person you are. Like, I know some people, they get really, really hung up on that big picture to the degree that it's hard for them to have enjoyment in the present moment. Conversely, some people make decisions really thinking about what's going to drive enjoyment, pleasure, make their life easier, in the next hours to weeks, and they don't necessarily think about the long term. But generally speaking, from what they sort of find with decision making, a lot of us are very much driven by that short-term emotion. Okay, next, expand your options. This is, of course, in contrast to me telling you that most of us have too many choices to make. However, there are times when we actually want to give ourselves a few more choices or a couple more choices to consider. So a lot of us do what they call either or thinking, which in the world of decision making, actually, it's not even really decision making. So either or thinking would be I either do a 4-week webinar series with Jeff, or I don't work with Jeff, right? It's like I do it or I don't. I take the trip to Italy or I stay home. I start a brick and mortar business or I don't. So we need to break out of that, because that sort of dichotomous black and white way of looking at things is really limiting us. So one question we can ask ourselves is like, what if the choice isn't either or, but both? So if you, for example, are thinking like, I either quit my job and go in with my photography business full time, or I just keep, working full time and juggling it, maybe there's a way to embrace both those things. So maybe you could actually look at scaling back your hours at work. Maybe you could look at doing like a contract with your, in your line of work, and then do some photography as well. So, there is a way sometimes to embrace both. And oftentimes we don't allow ourselves to consider that. It's like, no, it has to be one or the other. So I'd really encourage you to get creative and to say, if either of these options that I'm considering were off the table, what other things might I do? And there may be a way in which to accommodate both. Another thing we can do is add other choices to the mix. So, for example, with Jeff, if I say, well, I can't do this 4-week thing, and then, or I'm not going to work with him, like, well, maybe we do a one-off event together. Maybe we look at doing a 4-week series over the course of 4 months. What other kinds of options can I come up with in order to give more choices? I just mentioned this, but it's called the vanishing options test. So if you're feeling really stuck on decisions, this book, Thyself by Chip and Dan Heath, they talk about taking away, like imagine that the options you're considering are off the table, and then see what else you can come up with. So if you're trying to decide whether or not to have this brick and mortar studio, if Jeff said, okay, there's no brick and mortar studio, what other options might you have? You might say, well, maybe I could lease a secondary space from somebody, let's say a restaurant in the mornings when they're not open yet. Maybe I could look at doing a pop-up space. So by taking away this option or the options, often we can get more creative in coming up with new ideas. Next, automate your choices.
And I suppose, something like that could actually give you a feel for what the bigger picture is. And you could do a pop-up studio, and then you could actually come away from doing that. You might sign up to doing a pop-up studio in a local supermarket or something like that for 6 months, and then come away going, I'm so pleased I didn't open a studio.
Totally.
Yeah.
So
that could help you reinforce either whether it was a good decision or a bad decision.
Totally. You gave a bit of a sneak preview, because next week we're going to be talking about prototyping our ideas, and that's a perfect example of prototyping an idea. Taking an aspect of whatever choice we're considering and seeing how there's a way we can test drive that with much less output of energy, time, money, risk, you name it.
Right.
All right. Automate your choices. So perhaps you've experienced this, by the time dinner rolls around and your significant other asks you what you should have for dinner, what should we cook tonight? It's like, or should we order in Chinese or Indian? It's like, I don't know. I can't even make more decisions. So most of us, we get to a point in our days or weeks or lives where we reach a point of decision fatigue. And really, we've made too many decisions. Our brains are fried, and it's hard for us to use that part of our brain. So part of the way we can help reduce decision fatigue is to automate some of our choices. In other words, we're basically going to pre-decide. So again, this reduces decision fatigue, and it frees up your brain power for big decisions. And some simple ways, we don't have to do this just as it applies to your business, but you can look at other areas of your life that you can pre-decide in order to then really be on your game when you're required to make an important business decision. So a pre-decision could be saying, I have 3 different outfits that I wear, or maybe Jeff, for example, he wears a black shirt. We talked about this last week. After the call, that's a pre-decision. Jeff saying my uniform is black shirt and jeans. Every day I've got 20 different black shirts. They're clean. Jeff smells good. I'm sure he smells great. He's not having to then look in his closet and be like, oh God, what am I going to wear when I go on the shoot today? Or how's that? It's all decided. It's the same with people who do meal planning, or they say Monday's taco night and Tuesday we're going to have homemade soup or whatever, store-bought soup for that matter. By pre-deciding and looking at, even things in your schedule, like maybe Tuesdays you always send out an email to your clients. That's going to help you focus on big decisions. So some areas to explore, as I mentioned, sort of your daily, weekly schedule. You can look at your eating habits. You can look at your wardrobe. I mean, you can sort of automate your decisions and pre-decide for virtually any area, but they're usually kind of these little mundane things. We think they're mundane, but they do take time, energy, and they cause us stress over the long term.
Funny enough, I've just recently changed gyms and joined a new gym about 2 months ago. And with this new gym, because of COVID, you have to book in advance to go to the gym. So you have to book your slot, and that's worked out brilliant because I book every Wednesday, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday morning. So the week prior, I'll book for the following week, and I've actually so far in 2 months I haven't missed a single gym appointment because I've booked in, and I feel like if I don't turn up, I've taken somebody else's slot because there's only 4 slots per hour in the gym. But it's taken that decision away from me from getting up on the morning and going, what time shall I go to the gym? Or I'll do this, or am I going to go now? And actually, sometimes the putting off, I never get around to it. So it's really taken away that decision. It's been made for me the week prior, and I'm done, and I'm there.
I love it. That's such a good example. And I'm sure probably for you now, you might be thinking of like other areas of life where you can kind of have these things fixed in your calendar. And I think a lot of times people think that, oh, maybe that's kind of boring. Like, I just want to be spontaneous. But actually, I think the best way to have variety and spontaneity in our lives is to have sort of like a firm foundation on which to operate from, right? We can't have everything be like a total hot mess all the time. Otherwise, we're not going to get very far. Okay, I think this is my last tip, and this is to zone in on what matters. So where am I putting my focus? We need to look at, first of all, what efforts really matter? What actually is important here? Because not everything we're deciding, again, has significance. And not every area where we're spending a lot of time and energy really needs to have that. So does this decision warrant lengthy deliberation? And you can do yourself a favor, if, for example, like deciding what to wear in the morning, it takes you 30 minutes to decide and you change outfits 5 times. You might say, like, I need to pick out what to wear by the time I finish my morning coffee. Like, that's it, it's done. There's no more standing in front of the closet. It's not that important. We can also ask ourselves, can I make a choice that's good enough? I know we talked a bit about perfectionism. This is hard for a lot of us, I think, especially people in creative industries. But sometimes having a good enough choice is good enough. Like, my husband and I, we like cooking dinners and having like nice creative meals to make. But sometimes it's like, you know what, this is good enough. Tastes fine, it's healthy enough. Like, let's just make this decision. All right. Oh, I think this is the last one. I'm like, these tips just go on and on. So this is to go with your gut. And I think, a lot of people, they tell me, well, actually I make decisions with my gut-based decision making. And conversely, people say, like, I don't even really know how to do that. How do we decide with our gut? What does that look like? So what wisdom lies within? This is a funny thing to talk about tossing a coin in the context of gut-based decision making, but the act of tossing a coin, and of course this needs to go with a sort of either or option A or B choice, it sort of allows us to go into this relaxed state. And what we do, we toss a coin, and as the coin lands, there's 2 ways you can do this. One is you're gonna know right away, like, tails is we're going out for dinner, heads is we're staying in. If that coin lands, you're gonna probably feel this, oh, I really hope it's heads. I don't want to stay home tonight or whatever. Conversely, you can, once you see the outcome, if you feel sort of let down, like, oh, that also is going to give you some sort of knowing. So funny example, my husband and I, we actually decided to buy our dog this way because she was a foster dog and we had to make a decision by, I think, that weekend, whether we would adopt her. And there was a lot going on in our lives that week. We hadn't really had time to chat. So we said, let's just toss a coin. Heads, we use our head. We consider this more. We say, no, let's just reevaluate. And tails, of course, we would get the dog. And it landed on tails. And of course, we adopted our dog. But, if I would have seen that tail and it's like, oh shit, no, let's do a redo. Help us sort of tap into our inner knowing.
Funny enough, my ex-business partner, Kev, he was a big one for that, for tossing a coin. And he would just say, right, we can't make a decision. Heads we go with this, tails we don't, and that's it.
Totally.
And then sometimes it would flip, and then I'd go, can we do a best of 3? And no, the coin's answered. We've got to stick with what it said.
So you can either totally stick with it, or if you really feel gutted, like, oh no, I can't believe it landed on heads, well, that's going to tell you what you want, right? That's going to allow
Yeah.
you to connect with that sort of inner knowing. Another question we can ask, which the business coach Marie Forleo suggests and uses this, and I really like it. Does this path or this choice make me feel expanded or contracted? And this requires us to really be in touch with our own sort of bodily sensations, but take some quietude. And this is, probably you won't need to do this if you're going to choose what to have for supper. But if you're trying to decide, let's say you've decided to get a studio space and there's a lease where you need to decide by tomorrow, like, do I sign it or do I keep looking? Sit down, be quiet, 10 minutes. And when you think about taking or signing that lease, taking the studio, is there a feeling of expansion, opening, lightness, however you want to describe it? Or is it a contracted feeling? Does it feel kind of yucky? Does it make you go, ooh? Again, tuning into those subtle cues can help us really get in touch with what it is we truly want. The other thing we can do is just ask ourselves, how did aligned and fulfilling choices feel in the past? So if you say, when I decided to start this photography business, like I just knew that photography was the thing for me. Like as soon as I picked up that camera, how did that feel? Was there a certain sensation you got in your body? Was it expansive? What was that? And if you start paying attention to how we more easily make choices that feel good, we can start applying some of those cues to those decisions that we struggle with. All right, so decision-making resources, as I mentioned, a couple books I quite like on the topic are Thyself by Chip and Dan Heath, two brothers who've written quite a few different interesting books, and then Barry Schwartz, who's a real, kind of pro and psychologist in the area of decision-making, Paradox of Choice. Now, I mentioned on week 1, but if you haven't already, I've got this simple 4-question guide on my website that helps answer the question, what do I want? And it's something I pull those questions out myself sometimes. We were trying to make a decision about whether to sell a condo that we have in Canada or whether to keep it. And I was like, I'm going to look at these questions and apply it to this situation. And I thought, whoever wrote these is quite clever. This is helpful. So you can check those out and download those for free on my site. Lastly, next week, as I mentioned, Jeff's example that we were talking about prototyping this sort of studio through a pop-up, we're going to be talking more about that next week. We're going to be talking about prototyping your ideas, which is one of the favorite tools that I love using. It comes from design thinking, and we're going to talk about how you can apply this in your own business and life to sort of mitigate risk and help explore ideas that you might be considering.
So prototyping is effectively testing, isn't it, really? Yeah.
Yeah. And it comes from, so like in design thinking, for example, you want to design a car, you're not just going to go build the final car, right? We create prototypes. In product design, the iPhone wasn't just the iPhone, it was all these different variations. So there's a couple of professors at Stanford University in the design school, D school. They've written a book called Designing Your Life. And so the concept's borrowed from that, this idea of using design thinking to our own lives. And we're going to specifically explore prototyping and how we can do that. So
that sounds fantastic, because it is, like you say, it's a way forward of testing the ideas and also not committing for something too big straight away, isn't it? It's not like dipping your toe in the water, having a feel for what it's going to be like, and then maybe deciding if that's the way you want to really move forward.
Totally. Yeah, I think usually there's two schools of people. There's either the people who are, there's of course people in between. Broadly speaking, you get the people who are kind of afraid to try anything. So they're like, ooh, it's going to be like a big leap for me. And so prototyping is a great way to kind of move forward slowly. And then there's the people who often go too big and they end up sometimes making choices that are quite costly to them financially, emotionally, you name it. So prototyping is a great way to get yourself into action in a way that's quite, we'll call it safer. And it's going to give you more information so you can make a more informed and more confident choice. So like you say, it plays into decision making as well. So.
Brilliant. Well, I look forward to that. So that's going to be same time next week. So Tuesday next week. So that's the final one of our 4-part webinars. And if you've missed any of the previous webinars, just go to the hashtag Creating Successful Photographers, which you can see in the banner below here. And you can watch the replay of all 3 webinars. You can watch the replay of this one and the other 2 ones underneath that hashtag. And then if you haven't already, connect with Keltie and you can drop her a message if you have any questions. Obviously, drop me a message anytime. And if you don't have any more questions, I'll just check over the comments, and that's it. So hopefully, look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks very much for tuning in and watching this one, and look forward to seeing you for next week when we learn more about prototyping. Thanks again, guys.
Thank you.